Yeah, namaskar everybody. This is Rajiv Verma on behalf of Hindustan Republican Association. I want to welcome you with my colleagues. Here I see Colonel Sunil Agrawalji and some others may have joined. Um, Today's topic is very important in terms of narrative building in the US for our community. Um, uh, so far, we have seen a very diminutive image of our community here in the US based on certain historical factors. We don't want to go into that now, but the image of the community is built on certain it's built in a certain paradigm with certain history behind it. There is a certain heritage to it. um, in America, our positioning is based on basically what we can call as a Gandhian view of India as a whole. But in reality, that is very diminutive part of our heritage. There is a whole vast other area of our heritage that has been that has remained hidden, uh, uh, shoved under the carpet for many reasons. So today we are going to explore our heritage in its totality, especially those of us who have made America our home. Um, I want to introduce our distinguished speaker for today, Mr. Raja Roy. He's an engineer by profession, um, and also his heart beats for India. You can read his columns on medium.com and elsewhere. And he's a great thinker. And he will present to us the Gadar movement in the US and especially a revolutionary Tarak Nath. Gadar movement, as you know, it was a war waged, armed struggle waged by Indian patriots for India's freedom. Somehow, due to some reasons, as I outlined before, that heritage is deprecated here. And our effort, especially of Hindustan Republican Association, will be to bring that heritage out so that this generation and the coming generations can feel and get a sense of pride from that effort. So with that, I will hand it over to Sri Raja Roy to give his presentation. You can share the screen if you like.
Yeah, good evening, everybody. Namaskar. My name is Raja Roy, and obviously, I was born in Kolkata in India, but now living in Katy, Texas, with my wife, wedded for 34 years, my beautiful wife, and my two wonderful kids. They are kids no more. My older daughter Ronita is already married, and my younger daughter Ritika will be married soon. We live in Katy, but Ronita lives in New Mexico. And I was born in India, schooled in India, Kolkata, went to Mumbai to work. After that, moved to the UK and then to the USA. And by profession, I'm an engineer. But Rajiv ji eulogized me a lot by saying I'm a thinker. No, I'm a very simple person. I'm just very curious. And the only philosophy in my life is I'm more of a seeker than a believer. So I feel very honored to be invited by Rajiv ji, representing HRA. And representing HRA and then laying grounds on certain things like Indian revolutionary who were in the US, which we know very little about. There is a school of thought which subscribes to not everything was, when we say about everything, the Indian independence movement from the British and India getting independent from the British, not everything can be attributed to Gandhi. I am about to present a different side of a story, but I implore everybody with folded hands that this is my view, this is my conviction, this is what I believe in. I would be thoroughly very pleased if you also share my same convictions, but I do not want to hurt anybody's sentiments, and I do not want to say that whatever I believe is true, but I somehow believed in fact-based evidence, and whatever I'm going to say, I'm going to produce some evidence in today's presentation on the Indian revolutionary movement, how it all happened. And let me share the screen and let's see if we can take it from there. I hope all of you can see the screen. I want to set the stage. When I was very young, maybe in the early 70s, my mother's sister's husband, that is by Meshomoshai or Mausaji, he told me about the eminent historian Ramesh Chandra Majimdar, who actually wrote a book, The History of Bengal. Ramesh Chandra Majumdar was very famous and very eminent. He was a historian from Bengal, and he had a completely different view on how the Indian independence was won. So he says in his book, History of Bengal, that it was British Prime Minister Clement Attlee who, when granting independence to India, said that Gandhi's non-violence movement had next to zero effect on the British. In corroboration, Chief Justice P.B. Chakraborty of the Calcutta High Court, who had earlier served as acting governor of West Bengal, had an actual meeting with Prime Minister Clement Attlee because he was at that time the acting governor of West Bengal. And what Clement Attlee told him is presented in the next slide. So I have on the right the book, The History of Bengal, Hindu Period, edited by R.C. Majumdar, which is Ramesh Chandra Majumdar. And what is essence here is that when the gentleman, Chief Justice P.B. Chakraborty, questioned Lord Attlee at the Governor's Palace in Calcutta during his tour, he had a prolonged discussion with him regarding the real factors which led British to quit India. So he says, my direct question to him was, since Gandhi's Quit India movement had tapered off quite some time ago, and in 1947, there was no compelling situation that had arisen which would necessitate a hasty British departure, why did they leave? Clement Attlee cited several reasons. But one of the main reasons was the erosion of the loyalty to the British Crown amongst Indian Army and the Navy personnel, and as a result of military activities of Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. That means I hope many of you who were born in my era and even older to me would remember would have learned in history about the naval mutiny and how people from the Indian British Army were switching over to the INA under Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. It has to be said that the British Army consisted in the Second World War and in the First World War and the Second World War of mainly Indian soldiers, the ground soldiers who were at the ground level who were fighting. They constituted as a minimum more than 50% of the British Army. And those soldiers had an erosion of loyalty. When Subhash Chandra Bose started INA, they had an erosion of loyalty. There was a huge mutiny. Another reason was the effect of the Second World War Hitler caused a lot of damage to the economy of the British people, and they could not sustain the economy anymore. That would have been the second most reason why they quit India. So erosion of loyalty to the British Crown due to INA of Subhash Chandra Bose, who had reached Imphal, and due to absolutely decimated economic condition in Britain. Justice C.B. Chakraborty asked Attlee, to what extent was Gandhi's influence upon the British decision to quit India? Hearing this question, Attlee's lips became twisted in a sarcastic smile, and he slowly chewed out the words, minimal. Ladies and gentlemen, my dear friends, a lot of things have been written about Gandhi. I respect the person, I respect his nonviolent movement, but was he the main architect of getting us independent from the British? I beg to differ after reading all this and after what R.C. Majimdar has carefully elaborated. If you look at the slide, an opinion by a Flemish Indologist, a Belgian Indologist named Coenraad Elst. He says, yes, a Mahatma got us independence. That Mahatma's name was Subhash Chandra Bose. I don't know much about Coenraad Elst, but he has obtained MA degrees in sinology, Indology, and philosophy, and he had a lot of research done at the Banaras Hindu University. Original field work for a doctorate on Hindu nationalism. And I really feel totally in gratitude to this gentleman if he feels that the person, the Mahatma who got us independent was Subhash Chandra Bose. I tend to agree with him. Now, today's main topic. Rajiv ji told me to do a bit of research on Tarak Nath. I feel ashamed that very few Indians residing in the US and residing in India knew Tarak Nath's contribution. Who was Tarak Nath? By the way, can all of you see the entire, Rajiv ji, can you see the entire screen?
Yes, yes.
Okay. An Indian revolutionary in the US soil. Tarak Nath, in fact, was the first Indian citizen in US. I was amazed to know that. I mean, he got the US, he was the first Indian who got the US citizenship in the US. He was an anti-British Bengali Indian revolutionary and a scholar. He started the Free Hindustan publication that advocated political, social, and religious reforms for India. He and his wife instituted the Tarak Nath Foundations at Columbia University to encourage educational and cultural exchange. And one of the things which impressed me most was he had a big discussion with Leo Tolstoy, the writer of War and Peace. Leo Tolstoy is known to most of us, one of the biggest Russian writer. Tolstoy, like Gandhi, was a pacifist. And he believed he had a typical nonviolent stand like Gandhi. But he published, he wrote a letter to a Hindu to which Tarak Nath was very much opposed. And he wrote an open letter to Leo Tolstoy. And critical of Tolstoy's nonviolent stand, he wrote, "Nonviolence is an absolute dogma. Violence and benevolence are measured by relative value of the actions and the motives underlying them." What does that mean? That means if your enemy is deceitful, devious, demented, and conniving, if our enemy is that the main intent is looting of India, crippling India's economy systematically, leaving nothing for the country and its people, and making sure they prosper. How would you deal with that enemy? Would you deal with a civil disobedience movement, or would you think that the enemy deserves further to that with armed struggle and revolution? Tarak Nath shared this view, and I chanced upon looking at his autobiographical sketch, which was written by April 22 on 1908. I have some excerpts of it here, and that details his family life in India, his education and career as a teacher in India, an eventual departure from India first to Japan, and then to the US on June 18th, 1906. Think of it, the man went to Japan and then came to the US in 1906. Think of his persistence. Think of what he wanted to achieve in life. And certain thoughts of Tarak Nath. We are not worshipper of violence. Our idea of progress and comfort to humanity at large. Our idea is progress and comfort to humanity at large. We are believers in universal fellowship, but we are intolerant of any actions of exploitation of any nation, race, society, family, of individuals by others. If we have an intelligent enemy who is somewhat akin to our way of thinking, yes, we can. If we have a disagreement, yes, we can be nonviolent. But if our enemy believes in stripping us of everything that we have, then I believe that will not work. We will have to pay back in equal kind. Tarak Nath in 1907, after riots against Indians in Bellingham and Vancouver, he first came through Vancouver and then came here. He founded the journal Free Hindustan, in which he rallied against British rule in India. An early associate, Gurandit Kumar, helped translate the publication into Urdu and Gurmukhi to ensure wider reach amongst Indian immigrants. An early issue of Free Hindustan, Das listed as a journal manager, and he wrote, "The policy of the British government is to plunder Hindustan and oppress the people by keeping them in utter ignorance. We advocate India for Indians, and it must be governed by them. We implore the aid and sympathy of our friends all over the world to help our educational movement. Education alone can change the conditions of 300 millions of people in Hindustan at that time." And Free Hindustan caught the attention of the authorities, especially an Anglo-Indian officer named William Hopkinson, who had been deputed by British intelligence to monitor Indian radical activity in Europe, the US, and Canada. Tarak Nath and Leo Tolstoy, which I talked to you about. What also stirred interest was Das's debate with Russian writer Leo Tolstoy. In 1908, Tolstoy wrote an essay entitled "A Message to Young India," in which he insisted peaceful methods that should be adopted to achieve Indian independence. Tarak Nath respectfully disagreed. His response was in 4 parts, titled "Young India's Reply to Count Tolstoy," stressed that tyranny under any guise can never be justified, and that resistance to despotism is first of all human duties. He believed in human duties, and he said, mark his words, "Resistance to despotism is the first of human duties." So look at this. Bande Mataram, his first page, in which he wrote an open letter to Count Leo Tolstoy in reply to his letter to a Hindu. He quoted the Bhagavad Gita, the epitome of Hindu philosophy, And according to our common sense, we see there are 4 stages of existence to individual society and states. They are dullness, activity, serenity, and the state of gunatita. The gunatita is a quality amongst Hindu philosophers, which is the stage of being above all material qualities. But he also said that the dogma relative to dullness, wait, I cannot see the dogma relative to dullness to be fully applicable to activity, serenity, and so on. The diet of a young man is quite different from that of an old man. Tolstoy, your ideas are different from ours. Your sphere is to live above the material plane and renounce it altogether, where ours is to perform the duties as long as we live in the material plane. To you, there is no duty, but to us, we have duties. We are not worshippers of violence. Our motto is resistance to tyranny is a service to humanity and necessary to civilization. Resistance to aggression is not simply justifiable, but imperative. Non-resistance hurts both altruism and egoism and are not inconsistent with the laws of progress and service to humanity. Theories in which you possibly don't believe. He further said, our motto is not an absolute doctrine, but it is dependent upon the condition of society and state. If there is no trace of aggression and tyranny, there is no expression to our dogma. But as long as good and evil exists, as long as the rights of the weak are usurped by the strong, and as long as there remains the diversity of nature amongst human beings, our principle stands true. Some more facts about Tarak Nath. He resigned from the immigration services to focus on free Hindustan. And he joined a lot of people, nationalists like John Devoy and George Foreman, who were part of the Irish Republican Army movement. Back in Washington, he was also associated in a while with a student body of the Hindustan Association. He completed a bachelor's degree in political science and a master's degree, and he researched employer liability law. In 1914, he became the first Indian to be granted citizenship by the court in Seattle, on the grounds that as a high caste Hindu Aryan, he was a Caucasian under US Naturalization Act. I find that despicable. But still, US accepted that he was eligible to become a citizen because he was a high caste Hindu Aryan. Still in abroad, he received a warrant for arrest for anti-British activities in the US. Following Hindu-German conspiracy trial, he was sentenced to 22 months in Leavenworth Penitentiary on April 30th, 1918. He hated the London Times. And an anecdotal observation about Tarak Nath against the London Times, and I would like to read this to you all. Tarak Nath rose up one morning, called for his pipe, his pouch, his horn, and the London Times. Tarak Nath his turban donned, and gazed in the manner none too fond at the London Times. Tarak Nath his breakfast ate, while standing by his porridge plate was the London Times. Tarak Nath intensely gazed, then raised his eyebrows fully amazed at the London Times. Tarak Nath his meal forgot. The meal grew cold, but he waxed hot at the London Times. Tarak Nath in silent rage read these words in an inside page of the London Times: School of Sedition in British Columbia. Tarak Nath with fiery eye swore that he either must die or the London Times. Tarak Nath tugged at his wool, and he planned a vengeance horrible on the London Times. Tarak Nath took up his pen, a foolscap sheet, and then Alas, the London Times. He must have written something to the London Times which would cause misery. Anyway, I felt like reading it to you all. Some more facts about Tarak Nath, I think Now, what happened was Tarak Nath met with a lot of people, including Lala Hardayal. And Lala Hardayal was instrumental in finding the Gadar movement, the Gadar party. Initially, the Pacific Coast of Hindustan Association was formed in 1913 in the United States under the leadership of Lala Hardayal and Sohan Singh Bhakna as its president. It drew members from Indian immigrants, largely from Punjab. Many of its members were also from the University of California at Berkeley, including Dayal, Tarak Nath, Kartar Singh Saraba, and Vijay Pingle. This party quickly gained support from Indian expatriates, especially in the United States, Canada, and Asia. And these meetings were held in Los Angeles, Oxford, Vienna, Washington, D.C., and Shanghai. So think of how this movement had profound messages all over Europe and America. Unfortunately, the Ghadar plan to free India from British was a failure, but it sparked a revolution. The revolutionary message on San Francisco inspired Indian expatriates to return to motherland. I will be very honest with you, gentlemen and ladies. I did not know much about the Ghadar party when I started reading about it. I had heard about it, and I knew that Tarak Nath sided with Lala Hardayal, and they were the main exponents of it. But to how much extent they influenced was not known. Now, most of the members of the Punjabi community in Canada and United States, which I told, it was most prominent amongst a number of plans of the much larger Hindu-German mutiny against the British Raj in the World War. The mutiny was planned to start key in the state of Punjab, followed by mutinies in Bengal and the rest of India. Indian units as far as Singapore were planned to participate in the rebellion. The plans were thwarted through coordinated intelligence and police response. British intelligence infiltrated the Ghadarite movement in Canada and India, and last-minute intelligence from a spy helped crush the planned uprising in Punjab before it started. The key figures were arrested, and mutinies in smaller units and garrisons within India were also crushed. Its ultimate goal was to overthrow the British colonial authority in India by means of an armed revolution. It viewed the Congress-led mainstream movement for the Dominion state as modest, and the latter's constitutional method as soft. The Ghadar's foremost strategy was to entice Indian soldiers to revolt. And in 1913, they established the Yugantar press in San Francisco, and the press produced Hindustan Ghadar newspaper and other nationalist literature. Now, what caused this? It's interesting. Was it caused by some factor like Lala Hardayal being arrested or something like that? No, the major reason why this was caused was the Kumagata Maru incident, which involved the Japanese steamship Kumagata Maru, you see it here, on which a group of people from British India attempted to immigrate to Canada in April 1914. They were trying to immigrate to Canada but were denied entry and forced to return to Kolkata. There, the Indian Imperial Police attempted to arrest the group leaders. A riot ensued, and they were fired upon by the police, resulting in death of 20 people. And this, ladies and gentlemen, I believe, was the reason or the cause of the Ghadar movement. So it sailed from British Hong Kong via Shanghai, China, and Yokohama, Japan, to Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada on 4th April 1914, carrying 376 passengers from Punjab province in British India. The passengers comprised of 337 Sikhs, 27 Muslims, and 12 Hindus, all Punjabis and British subjects. Of these 376 passengers, 24 were admitted to Canada, but the other 352 were not allowed to disembark in Canada, and the ship was forced to leave Canadian waters. The ship was escorted by HM His Majesty's CS, or Her Majesty's CS Rainbow, one of Canada's 2 naval vessels. This was one of the several incidents in 20th century which exclusion laws in Canada and the United States were used to exclude immigrants of Asian origin. My reading tells me this was the cause of the Ghadar movement. I will give you a brief sketch on Hardayal, Lala Hardayal. He graduated from the Oxford College, Government College, Lahore, University of Punjab. He went to St. John's College at Oxford, became a supporter of the Indian Revolutionary Movement. In 1907, Hardayal resigned from his scholarship. He returned to India in 1908 to further indigenous political institutions and to arouse his countrymen against British rule. But the government thwarted his work, and he soon returned to Europe. He traveled through France and Germany, disseminating anti-British propaganda and lauding Western science and political philosophy as holding to the key to a successful anti-colonial struggle. In 1913, he formed the Ghadar Party to organize a rebellion against British government of India. So after the German defeat of the World War I, Hardayal settled in Stockholm as a professor of Indian philosophy and wrote 44 months in Germany and Turkey. In his later years, he decisively rejected his earlier revolutionary viewpoint. He abandoned his Anglophobia, advocated the mixed British and Indian administration of his country, and became a firm admirer of the Western culture and values. I don't know why. He moved to the United States in 1920 and became a professor of Sanskrit at the University of California, Berkeley. Ladies and gentlemen, that is all what I have gathered about the Ghadar Party movement and how Tarak Nath was involved, how Lala Hardayal was involved, and they formed the Ghadar Party. But unfortunate that they didn't actually succeed in the mission, but they raised the awareness of what British were oppressing India about. And I believe that influenced a lot of other revolutionaries all over the country. Let's now look at the place from where I was born, Bengal. Bengal had a lot of freedom fighters and revolutionaries. When I was very young, I used to lie beside my grandmother's bed, and she used to read me a book, Ami Subhash Bolchi. This is Subhash speaking. And I learned a lot from her about the Chittagong Armory raid. Like it said, the armory was raided by 100 insurgents, 6 persons shot dead. The railway and telegraphic communications were cut off. They tried a lot. They were successful in a lot of areas, but they were not entirely successful at all. But lest we forget Loknath Ball, who was here, together with his brother Tegra Ball. That on the right is Pitilata Vadadar. And the old gentleman here, ladies and gentlemen, is Shubodh Dash. He was just 14 years old when he participated in the Chittagong Armory raid. And he survived, and he later wrote a book, a very famous book. The Chattogram or Chittagong Astraghar Lunthan, that is the ghar where the astras were, the lunthan of that. I pay my homage to Master Da or Shurja Sen. Look at him. He doesn't look like Hrithik Roshan, big, brawny, with 6 packs, a simple schoolmaster But think of what went around his head. Think of the persistence, think of the love for his country, the determination for which he led such an expedition to revolt against the British. And he was popularly called as Master Da and will be remembered in Bengal's history throughout as Master Da Surya Sen. He was influenced by the nationalist ideas of 1916 and joined a revolutionary organization, Anusilan Samiti. He was noted for the Chittagong Armory raid, where British arms were seized and Indian flag was hosted. While hiding, he took up a job as a workman, a farmer. He was brutally tortured before he was hanged. Brutally tortured. British executioners broke all his teeth, pulled out all his nails, broke all his limbs and joints. You talk about the British being benevolent. You talk about Ahimsa and non-violent movement and the civil disobedience against the tyranny that was caused by these despots. Sir, madam, I beg to differ. There was another guy, I forget his name. He was hanged by his hair. The gallows in Chittagong Central Jail, Bangladesh, where Sen was hanged. The government of Bangladesh has designated it a historical monument. This is where it is. This is where the gallows were. And to remember the women freedom fighters. Priti Lata Vadadar, Kalpana Nath. Kalpana's story is one of resilience, strength, and survival. She was given the responsibility of transporting explosives and other supplies. She particularly excelled in preparing gun cotton. Priti Lata was then given the most important task of her life, to lead 40 men in marching to Pahartali European Club and torch it. When she and her team managed to torch the club, British troops arrived soon after they had done the deed, and an intense gunfight broke out. Eventually, Priti Lata and her team were ambushed by the British soldiers. She and her team fell victim to the troops' guns, and she was fatally wounded. But Priti Lata was not to surrender to the British. She chose to commit suicide instead of giving herself to the British, ingesting cyanide at the last moment. We have Matangini Hazra, Beena Das, Kamala Das Gupta, Lavanya Prabha Ghosh, Suhasini Ganguly, Sarojini Chattopadhyay, who became Naidu, Sucheta Majimdar, who became Kripalini. Just to illustrate a few notable women freedom fighters. This lady here is Madhusri Mukherjee. I have her book. I treasure her book, and I have read it beginning till the end, where there was a movie 3 years ago. I forget the actor's name. He won the Oscar for it, Gary something, who portrayed Winston Churchill. And this movie showed what a great hero Winston Churchill was and eulogized him. This lady who is in Germany, has a German husband, she is an Indian journalist, Madhusri Mukherjee. She wrote about Churchill's secret war, the British Empire, and the ravaging of India during the World War II. A series of Churchill's decisions between 1940 and 44 directly and inevitably led to the deaths of some 3 million Indians in Bengal. The streets of eastern Indian cities were lined with corpses. Yet, instead of sending emergency food shipments, Churchill used the wheat and ships at his disposal to build stockpiles for feeding post-war Britain and Europe. Nothing can excuse the odious behavior of Winston Churchill, who deliberately ordered the diversion of food from starving Indian civilians to well-supplied British soldiers, even to top up European stockpile in Greece and else. The starvation of anyway underfed Bengalis is less serious, than that of sturdy Greeks, Churchill argued. Grains for Tommies, bread for home consumption in Britain, 27 million tons of imported grain, a wildly excessive amount, and generous buffer stocks in Europe for yet to be liberated Greeks and Yugoslavs were Churchill's priority, not the life or death of his Indian subjects. I am just elucidating these things, these facts, ladies and gentlemen, to just make you realize that who ruled us, they were not exactly benevolent, and who deserved civil disobedient and quit India and non-violent movement to be able to get rid of them. And this is my favorite. I've almost reached towards the end of my presentation, but this is my favorite. Look at him, Cyril Radcliffe, a man who had never been to the east of Paris, was given the chairmanship of 2 boundary committees set up with the passing of the Indian Independence Act. Who set up these boundaries? Who was in the boundary committee? Of course, Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. Of course, Jawaharlal Nehru. Of course, Muhammad Ali Jinnah. He was faced with the daunting task of drawing the borders for new nations of Pakistan and India in a way that would leave many Hindus and Sikhs and Indian Muslims in Pakistan as possible. He was given only 5 weeks to complete the job. Think of it, 5 weeks. He just comes to India and draws a line. Someone who had never gone east of Paris. His efforts saw some 14 million people, roughly 7 million from each side, flee across the border when they discovered new boundaries, left them in the wrong country. And in the violence that ensued after independence, estimates of loss of life accompanying and preceding the partition vary between several hundred thousands and 2 million, and millions or more were injured. After seeing the mayhem occurring on both sides, Radcliffe reduced his salary of 40,000. Any decent man would do that. But this act killed more than 2 million Indians. This act, which was enacted by the Indian government, the so-called Indian leaders at that time, who believed and who helped the British rule in diversity, that is, divide and rule. Ladies and gentlemen, I ask you, how did these heroes die? What was or who was responsible for their death? I'm very curious to know. How did Netaji die? How did Shyama Prasad Mukherjee die? In fact, had it not been for Shyama Prasad Mukherjee, West Bengal wouldn't have been West Bengal. It would have been Pakistan. How did Lal Bahadur Shastri die? Why did he die untimely? Can anybody tell me? These people here, Bhagat Singh, Sukhdev, Rajguru, Chandrasekhar Azad, Khudiram, Binoy Badwal Dinesh, Baka Jotin, were they terrorists or were they freedom fighters? Why did Bhagat Singh die? Why was he hanged? Why did somebody sign his death warrant saying that he's a terrorist? Why couldn't M.K. Gandhi stand up and tell him that he's not a terrorist? He's a freedom fighter. A terrorist is like a hijacker who kidnaps women, children, hijacks a plane full of innocent people, and then shouts their ideal and tells the whole world, if you don't listen to me, I'm going to kill all of them. Did our freedom fighters ever dream of such things? There is a difference between freedom fighter and terrorist. A distinct difference, which is what I believe. And I question, why these people were termed as terrorists who just were seeking freedom for their country. And I would like to end this session by Kavi Rabindranath Tagore and his poetry, which is in Noshtonir or Gitanjali, where the mind is without fear and the head is held high, where knowledge is free, where the world has not been broken up into fragments by narrow domestic walls, where words come out of the depth of truth, where tireless striving stretches its arms towards perfection, where the clear stream of reason has not lost its way into dreary desert sand of dead habit, where the mind is led forward by thee into ever-widening thought and action, into that heaven of freedom. My Father, let my country awake. I find it very appropriate in today's world. Thank you very much, everybody. I would like to now unshare my I'm sorry I took up so much of your time.
No, that's perfect. That's perfect, Rajaji. It's a very great presentation. Let me enable for questions. Okay, allow participants to unmute. So before we begin, if anybody has questions, they can ask. But I mean, looking at your presentation, um, so this heritage needs to be given more exposure, and this is just lying, I would say, non-utilized. It's not being utilized at present. For instance, our children, whether in their own schools or in Sunday schools, they don't learn about these heroes, and these people were here in the U.S. Uh, this heritage, by this time, schools would have been named after Tarak Nath and Lala Hardayal and Sohan Singh and others. Um, why do we have statues of Mohandas Gandhi in public parks? That too paid by U.S. taxpayers, that is us. Why don't we have statues of Tarak Nath and Lala Hardayal and Sohan Singh and so on? So that question needs to be asked, and it needs to be answered, and some effort needs to be made. So a lot of people have this question, like what can we do, like at whatever level. So a lot. The answer is a lot. Even if you are uh, towards you're retired, you have done whatever community service you have done, still you are an influencer. So immediate task is to do research and to come up with or update this knowledge that can be given to the community. So that can be done even sitting at home, just like Rajaji has done. And it will not take just one or two people. It will take more and more people to research these heroes. Secondly, our school systems. So leave the public school system aside for the moment, but even in our Sunday school circuit, uh, are these heroes being covered, especially the ones who lived here in the U.S. And I'm surprised that this thread hasn't been picked up yet for our Sunday school education. So there's a lot to be done there. And then our public education system, in our high school, middle school, high school, even elementary school, where social studies are covered. People learn about their own heritage. People learn about Thomas Jefferson. People learn about George Washington. But for our community, Indian American community, or Hindustanis, um, our George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, who lived here in the U.S., were Tarak Nath and Lala Hardayal. It's a very simple equation. So why that hasn't been picked up yet? And then this of naming institutions. Why don't we have institutions, schools, colleges, Montessori named after these people? So these are the questions that need to be asked, answered, and then action needs to be taken. But I truly appreciate Rajaji, you doing this wonderful research, sharing your knowledge with us, and hope this thing is propagated far and wide. And I can say on behalf of Hindustan Republican Association that we'll be taking up many of these activities, but we should not be the only one. It should be propagated far and wide, and everybody should pitch in. Another very important topic that you touched upon was the Bengal famine, which was a genocide. It was a genocide committed by the British government, and they were culpable. Um, so we know about the Jewish Holocaust. 6 million Jews were slaughtered by Hitler, right? And that figure of 3 million, that I've also read Madhusri Mukherjee's book. 3 million is actually an understated figure. I mean, the actual figure who died because of British complicity is much higher. So why don't we have that genocide that was committed by the British in our school education? If our children can learn about Jewish Holocaust, so they can also learn about Bengali Holocaust that was perpetrated by the British. And it was not just Bengal province; it was same thing was done in Tamil Nadu, or what was known as Madras Presidency also. So it was a Holocaust committed against Indians by the British. It's very simple as that. We should have museums. We should have books written on it. We have more books written on it. We should have museums where children can go and learn about this Holocaust. We should have memorial days on this Holocaust, and so on. So this is the kind of work that is needed, and I invite all those who are listening, all those who may go through this after we put this video on YouTube, to think in this direction and just pitch in whatever you can. Thank you, Rajaji, and I'll if anybody has questions, they can.
Yeah, there were two questions.
Yeah.
Rajaji, if it's okay, I'd like to ask a question myself.
Sure.
So, obviously, in terms of our diaspora, in terms of, the Hindu and the Indian diaspora at large, we very much are viewed both by ourselves and by the outside world as a, inherently non-political group, right? A group that, maybe comes here, keeps their mouth shut, becomes a doctor, an engineer, and then, kind of just dies silently. Yet, when looking through this history, right, when looking through this history, not only these members, but also other Gaddar Party members and many more, we can see that Indians have been very politically involved for quite a long time in this country. So how do we take that, kind of political spirit that was there 100 years ago and reignite it in the, in the high-five people in the United States? What's your opinion?
Yeah, wonderful. It's a very loaded question. Rutviji, can you introduce yourself, give your background also? I want to capture not only the question, but who is asking that question also. So yeah, please introduce yourself, Rutvij.
Yes, Saivabhyo Namaha. My name is Rutvij Chole. I am the executive committee member on Americans for Equality PAC. We work to fight reservation, or as it's known in the United States, affirmative action, which is hurting disproportionately Indians and all other Asian people. And so that's what I'm doing right now. And I'm also an activist. I work with, HSS, HAF, KONA, and all of other Hindu groups to ensure that Hindu rights are respected in the United States.
A good question, Rutvij, if I have pronounced your name correctly. Would you like to reignite all these passion that I showed in telling you how Indians in America at that time were actively involved in letting the world know what is going wrong in our motherland through the people who are occupying our land? So now what you're saying is, well, the history hasn't taught us given us the proper perspective. In some cases, like Rajiv ji mentioned, undue importance are being paid to certain Indian leaders who don't deserve that. But in order to let the people know what was the actual history, how it all came about, how did India achieve its independence? Because through history we learn. Learning is a continual process, and history tells us the way, what was right and what was wrong. And if we can paint a correct picture to the present generation who are interested to know, I wouldn't use the word reignite, but I would use the word at least to make them aware that certain things that are being told are not exactly correct. Certain political views that are being mooted may not work. In certain situations, when you have your enemy to some extent, I shouldn't use the word enemy, or the other half who you don't agree with, if they resort to deceitful, devious, demented, conniving means to absolutely strip you of your belongings, then you have to raise up your head and you have to take measures which what others are saying, do it the non-violent way, believe in ahimsa, believe in Gandhian philosophy, believe in Leo Tolstoy's philosophy, may not work. Why it may not work? The proper perspective of history needs to be brought there. So how do we bring about that? I think I just presented my views today in a forum, in a platform. We have to widen it. We have to circulate this. We have to get people debate with us, understand us. And that's the only way, I think, through symposiums, through meetings, through people like you taking interest in it. And I'm very happy that you asked this question.
Can I add something?
Yeah. Yeah.
My name is Sachi Dasida.
Yeah.
Sachi Dasida.
Yeah, please introduce yourself, Dr. Dasida.
Yeah. I'm a professor here in New York. I appreciate Raja Babu, your presentation. Actually, here we have for quite some time project, actually some of people here who are involved also, called Indian Subcontinent Partition Documentation Project, which is going on in our 11th year. And we have been documenting some of these things we are saying. We covered Bengal famine too, which some reports says between not just 3 up to 7 million people were killed when we had a bumper crop. And Churchill destroyed 60,000 boats, so that from one village to another village, they cannot carry whatever little grain were left. But there are other things. So we have been doing it. And you mentioned the Holocaust. I have documented killing in the eastern part. Even the 2 million killed that you mentioned during partition often ignores Bengal part.
Yes, yes.
One book that is coming up with a new edition, it's called original book, which came in 2008, called Empire's Last Casualty, Indian Subcontinent's Vanishing Hindu and Other Minorities. So that documented killing of Hindu minority just in Bangladesh, which started in 46 Noakhali killing, and I ended up in 2001 census, where we found out from the census about 49 million Hindus are missing from the census from 1947 until 2001 Bangladesh census, and approximately 3.1 million Hindus have been murdered since Noakhali killing. And that's when we also started to establish a museum, because our story have never been told. I have been to Pakistan many times. I've been to Bangladesh many times. Also, I have a foundation which educates poor and orphan children called Probini Foundation in Bangladesh, also in West Bengal, Assam, and Mizoram. So what you have raised is very important. Even in Indian textbooks do not talk about history books School books do not talk about Bengal famine killing, which is man-made famine. It doesn't talk about even first Bengal partition. My students here in New York did a paper and a petition in 2005, but nobody in India, Bangladesh, or Pakistan talked about Bengal first partition of India, 1905, called Bengal Partition. So I can go on, but these are the things that we in India we do not teach our kids. I was never told, only after I started to write. I started to visit my ancestral homeland, Bangladesh, from where they were driven out. And I go there every year. And so now there have been tremendous change in places where we have built schools. All by default, they are all run by Hindus, and Buddhist also in some places. So, point being, it is true that the history is not taught. Our history, what Britishers killed. Actually, we have asked Mamata Banerjee, who have built a London Tower in Calcutta. We were shocked and we wrote to her, please name it 1943-44 man-made Bengal famine memorial. Because we cannot destroy that, but of course she didn't respond. So this is what we are, and we need to teach our kids. We need to even tell people. When I, after my first book, when I had reading in many campuses, students, American students, asked me, how come nobody knows this? You know, and they saw that this is true, but they're keeping asking. And I, as a member of a Holocaust memorial here in Queens, in New York City, so this is our fault that we do not tell our kids, we do not teach, and so I'm very glad that you guys have
Yeah.
done that,
Mm.
and
Yeah, thank you, Professor Dastidar. You have put in an enormous amount of effort into the partition project, and I personally have been so enlightened by the work that your center has done, and of course, you as a expert. But I don't want for Rutvik. The question he asked is very loaded one. I don't want to let any part of it go away. So yeah, Rutvik, if you can hang on there. Let's go to the second part of his question. So I will attempt to address that, and if anyone has any addition to that, that's all welcome. So Rutvik asks, uh, we were a very political people at when we had come, like Tarak Nath Das, right? There was a issue, so people like Tarak Nath Das picked it up, and we have always been a political people. But how come today's generation or today's community is not much interested in politics as such? Well, uh, I'll give you certain factors, and if somebody else also has any perspective, can. So if you look at today's politics that we engage in as a community, and Rutvik also is a part of that, it's based on other people's or other communities' ideas and their history and their heritage. For instance, a lot of political activity goes on already. Like you will see Indians running for offices, local offices, national offices. Now we have so many congressmen, um, uh, and of course we have now a vice president. um, but what is the basis of their politics? If you see, they will not include India, Indian heritage, Hindustani heritage, you can call it greater India also, including people of Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Nepal. Um, they're, they are basically deploying our community and our resources in the service of others. So, so you have, certain organizations who will sponsor political candidates. Those candidates may or may not be Indian by origin, but even among that group, even if that political candidate who is running for office, he's an Indian, but his politics is always in service of others, whether it's the left side of the political spectrum, or it is the right. Now, of course, the left side was represented early. There, you can look at Federal Election Commission's contribution or OpenSecrets.org, and you can find out who is funding whom, on what basis, like who is funding Pramila Jaipal, who is funding Ro Khanna, who built up Ro Khanna in Bay Area, and ultimately Ro Khanna gave a tight slap. That is all, water under the bridge. So who is funding these people and why? The question of why needs to be answered. That's what I'm extending Rutwij's question and of politicization of the Indian community. So that question of why, it's not based in the Indian American or the Indian heritage. It is other people's causes that we Indians pick up and we become good at it. Even like President Biden's, even what is that? The person who is preparing his speeches is an Indian, for instance, or the person who is running the actual brains and the nuts and the bolts of Black Lives Matter. There are many Indians there. The people who run AOC's campaign, they're Indians. One guy is from Dallas, a very bright guy, who went to Ivy League and now is running basically AOC's campaign, and other people. Similarly, on the right or the right side of the political spectrum, you have now these so-called Indian conservatives who have propped up, and especially here in Texas, you will find them, sponsoring political candidates, programs, funding political candidates, and actually running for office. The point here is what Rutwij brought out, that all these efforts do not have Indian American, or call it Hindustani-American heritage in their background. So they are fighting. They are just like Sipah Salars of the Mughal Empire. So Mughal Empire, an invader comes from outside, and all the Indians rise up to help that empire to establish. And similarly with British, if you look at the history of the British Empire or British Raj in India, it was Indians who actually propped it up. Otherwise, there was no way for British to actually even survive. So you can see these two great historical instances where outsiders came, set up their empires, and it was Indians who, for their salaries or for their titles, served those powers. Similarly, in US politics, we have a whole lot of money that is being given to political candidates, but there is no Indian American or Hindustani American basis to that. They are serving basically the equivalent of Mughal empires and British Raj today in American politics. Now, is there a proposition or is there a scope for change? That will come only through education, when we discover our political heritage here of what Rajaji presented today, Tarak Nath and Lala Hardayal and the Gadar movement. That will give us the rationale for American politics today. That was a point. So Rutwij, I hope between the three of us have answered your question. But if anything remains in your question, because it's a very important question, please let us know.
May I please have a moment, please?
Yeah, sure.
Hello?
Please introduce yourself before you speak up.
Right. I am Dr. Akkaraju Sharma. I live in suburban Philadelphia for a long time. I didn't know about your program till Dr. Dasjidar sent a note to me yesterday. First and foremost, I want to acknowledge that in 1976, I received a small grant from Tarak Nath Foundation. As a consequence of it, I have a number of publications that have been done on the subject of Indian diaspora, Indians within USA, including Tarak Nath Das a little bit, and a lot more about a number of Bengalis that came to USA in 1905 and stayed behind and fought for India's freedom in a number of ways. That article is published in, thank you, Dr. Dastidar, in ISPAD, and also most of my publications are in uh, research, researchgate.net and academia edu. If you look at Akkaraju Sarma, you will find it. But the point is that in 1905, we had a number of Bengalis who did not like the colonial empire and joined together and fought together in little bits of a time, and some of them went to jail, much like Professor Tarak Nath in West Coast. That is documented in that articles. Ramba Gupta, Prafulla Mukherjee, Dhiren Sen, and so on, and they all fought for the freedom of India. At the same time, they were also contacting different parts of the US administration in the Congress to see how they can get the colonial empire be removed. Your forum has opened my mind. I learned a lot today. And a couple of more things on Tarak Nath Das that I would like to add on. In the year 1908, Tarak Nath Das published a very important article, how the British in the factories in India were giving the workers' children who were there with the parents, cocaine in order for them to sleep and rest with the consequential issues. I don't want to take too much of your time, but I do have contributed a number of things. If you send me an email, I will be able to share with you by email. If not, they are on the researchgate.net and www.academia.edu. I want to end my input to you by acknowledging the gratefulness I received a very small grant from Tarak Nath Das Foundation. My academic roots in Philadelphia have been long. My advanced training has been in Columbia University, and since then I had moved on to medicine. And now I am involved in these things. And Dr. Dastidar, thank you very much for letting me know yesterday about this program. And I rest. I thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Sharma. That was wonderful. We always look for, it's great to know that you have already done so much work. We would like to have you for a full length program. But wonderful. I will look up your research. I mean, I did some research. The closest I was able to find was somebody from Atlanta, but there was a phone number given, but I tried calling that, but there was no response. But anyways, it's great to know you came to know. I really thank Dr. Dastidar to share this program with you,
Right.
and we'll be in touch.
Just
We are looking for resources, experts, who can do like some educational programs and make presentations and share their knowledge with us so that we can spread it all over. Thank you very much. I've given you my email address. Kindly share. Okay, I see. Or I will get
yeah,
your contact from Dr. Dastidar.
no problem. Let me kindly add one more thing.
Mm-hmm.
I interviewed Mr. P.C. Mukherjee. P.C. Mukherjee came in 1905 along with all these people, and they called themselves in the Bengali word Biplavi. They wanted to fight and win the war, and they want a wonderful thing. P.C. Mukherjee had enormous time and effort put into it and contacted every senator, including JFK when he was president, and the and Fulbright from Arkansas about getting relief for India, and contacted a number of senators and congressmen to get the relief for India. And the position taken by the US Congress was, if the British is fighting win the war, we are going to have our trade go strong. Those documents he had left, unfortunately, as a Xerox. And I think these are really, really landmark things. And then the other point that was made earlier, why the schools are not being, US schools are not recognizing Indian context important events. the Hindu-American Foundation is doing substantial work, and I think you should reach out to them mutually, benefit each other. Hindu-American Foundation has established roots all over the place in order to propagate the positive parts of Indian contribution. And then in Philadelphia in 1976, we did have the bicentennial of USA, 1776 to 1976. I did present a paper at the University of Pennsylvania, and one of the key points I want to tell you, probably you know it for good, that Elihu Yale knocked off tons and tons of rupees from India and set up the Yale University, whose endowment is all vitamin M from India from long time ago. So these are all documented, but I enjoyed the conference today. If you have any questions, please reach out to me. Dr. Dastidar can give the information. In the registration, I left my email address, so on. So although I'm now a retired physician, my roots are in academia and mostly also in anthropology and medicine. Thank you very much again.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Sharma.
I would like to establish contact with Dr. Sarma and Dr. and Shochida, Dr. Dastidar. It's a pleasure knowing you. It's really a pleasure knowing you, and I hope that I was able to put some value in your time that you spent today.
Absolutely, absolutely. Sorry to interrupt. I left my partition documentation projects website as well as email. You can contact through that, and do write, do participate. We have published Dr. Sharma's 2 articles, which are very important, and many others. Every year we publish a journal. In October, we have annual conference, and people from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh have come. And people also, Bangladesh people also know that I help Bangladesh minorities because we have built schools. But yet I'm very proud that Bangladesh government asked me to do their presentation of the genocide during their 50th anniversary commemoration on 25th of March. I did a presentation on the genocide that Pakistan did, which was 3 million killed, but 90 to 95%, according to my research, were in the minority. And you have also YouTube. You have all these documentation interviews of people. So,
yeah, thank you, Dr. Dastidar. So I think we're running out of time. So Mohini, you want to ask your question?
Yes, I just want, well, it's a question and also a perspective. When the learned speaker was focusing on honing on the culpability of the British imperialists, it's not just British imperialism, it's pan-white supremacist, because you have to remember that the Australia was very, very culpable as well. They also withdrew, supplies of food during the Bengal famine. The Americans and the Canadians, it's pan-white supremacy, and the Gadar movement was being suppressed in Canada with the help of the Canadian officials. So it's very much pan-white supremacist. I was first generation, had the great misfortune and misery to be born in Britain in the 1960s. It was the most horrific ordeal and experience. I don't know how I even survived it with my head straight. And I've come out to be such an ardent nationalist. And it frustrates me because I don't speak Hindi or Bengali. I don't understand it, but I do understand the nuances of good and evil. And I'm always right there behind the true Dharma, you know.
Mohini ji, I appreciate you saying that you understand the nuances between good and evil. That's all. We have to be seekers, we have to have common sense, and we have to learn to distinguish with what is good and what is evil. And when evil perpetrates in a way that it goes, the quantity becomes more than the quality, then I think we got to take steps, which we mentioned, which our predecessors have shown. They need not be steps curtailed to just disobedience and satyagraha and walking and taking out salt from the sea. Those are important, but you got to be more than that.
Right. And Rajiv Ji was rightly questioning why we don't have all these nationalist and true depictions and institutions and structures that portray the real truth. Well, this is the whole system is stacked against us because it's a white supremacist, racist, racialist, imperialist system. And the more that we're willing to speak about race, this is racist. It's the white man's dominionship over the entire world. And they use ruthless, brutal, and cruel ways, psychological, physical, economic, whatever they have in their hands. They use those as tools of oppression and suppression of the non-white. And that's the naked reality. As much as people like to say it's about religion and anti-Hinduism, it's racial. I mean, the blacks are having the same problem with this critical race theory debate that's going on now in the West. The right wingers are trying to suppress it. You know what I mean? The right wing imperialists, pro white supremacists are pushing back to get it removed, to struck off, banned. This is exactly the same thing that Hindus are facing in India, you know, with the true depiction of Indian history. And also we should not forget to count the Chapka Brahmins who were persecuted and murdered by ignorant Indians, secular-minded Indians after Godse had assassinated Gandhi and Godse was hung. The whole of his community bore the brunt of vengeance by foolish, ignorant, what I would say is willfully ignorant Indians who didn't want to dig for the truth because they didn't care. They just wanted to be on the side of the powerful, the famous. And I'm sorry, nothing has really changed today. I have really suffered at the hands of, Indians who work for white supremacy, who support white supremacy, support white supremacist strategies. All these Indians that Rajiv Verma talked about, who are supporting the left, who are supporting the Democrats, who are supporting the pro-Muslim, anti-Hindu, anti-India strategies, they're all supporting the strategies of the white supremacists, the same years to divide and rule. The same violent sectarianism. They unleash the hounds of hell on the Hindus to isolate us and to keep us at bay. And the strongest of us who can resist the oppression, who even have the sense and the rationale and the honesty and the courage to face up to the reality, the brutal realities, there are very few of us because Hindus have been dumbed down into a very, mostly selfish race of people, cowardly race of people, who just are concerned about their own immediate families. They don't care about the greater good or the greater cause. They're just interested in self-survival and promoting their own children who are worthless, have never done anything good for India or good for Dharma or anything righteous in their lives. So there's a massive suppression of virtue and promotion of vice. And the white supremacists use this carrot and stick system where you're punished. If I had known this truth in the 1980s when I went to British universities, they would have failed me. I believe they threaten people who speak the truth about Churchill even now. They're told to shut up or else, So they're warned. I remember when I was started doing a master's degree at London University in Commonwealth history, there were two Indian communists and they were anti-Gandhi for other reasons. They were not pro-Hindu, they were just communist leaning, left leaning, and they hated Gandhi for other reasons. And they were threatened that they would be rusticated, thrown off the course if they continued with these anti-Gandhi writings and railing against Gandhi. So that white supremacist ideology, that whitewashing, revisionist history, that intellectual terrorism, which it is still being used to keep Indians in their place. And those who speak out have to face the consequences. And I don't expect anything less. If my forebears, who were much braver and bolder than I am, faced the gallows and execution, persecution, being whipped on ice, being terrorized, thrown, and incarcerated, why should we expect any better? It's the same principle at work, that virtue will be persecuted. And, I think our own religion goes against us. So there's a misunderstanding of karma. No, you don't get what you deserve. The virtuous and the righteous get persecuted at every level, and the evil has tremendous power and suzerainty. So and our gurus are following Gandhi with that non-violence nonsense, weakening us. And I think they're part of the system of to support white supremacy. So long as they get their little privileges and have their mini empires and get their money and followers, how are they any different to Gandhi? They're selfish narcissists, most of them.
Yeah. So
if they were genuine, they would be facing the same oppression and the same persecution that the righteous Indians have faced. So the fact that they're prospering in a white supremacist system is proof right there and then that they are followers and adherents of white supremacy, and they selfishly just want their own little pieces of the pie and breadcrumbs from underneath their white master's tables. I think it's absolutely disgusting.
Mohanji, so you have echoed many of our sentiments there. I truly appreciate your comment. Unfortunately, we are out of time. So is Gaurji there online, or Sunilji, you are there? Maybe you can.
Yes, I'm here, Rajivji.
Yeah. So Sri Gaurji, I'll just, those who don't know, I'll introduce him. There are you. Okay, there you are. Okay.
Namaskar.
Yeah. I know you were indisposed.
Yeah, sorry, I was late.
So Sri Gaurji, we have like a couple of minutes left. So you can. So Sri Gaurji is president of Hindustan Republican Association of USA, and is leading the charge here so Gaurji, just tell us about yourself briefly and the organization, and then we can wrap up because we are already behind.
Well, I'm just your Sahayogi, or maybe you can call in any way somebody who maybe would like to learn a lot from you all and contribute what I know. And I really am very thankful for our chief guest today and the other participants who really are very knowledgeable. And I came late. I'm sorry. I apologize to every one of you, but I learned a lot today. And I'm really very thankful to everyone that you joined us. And hopefully we'll have some more events like this in the future. And you all will join us later. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. Thank you, Rajivji.
Yeah, and one more point. I think we probably hit a gold mine when Dr. Dastidar joined us, and he brought in Dr. Sharma. So we'll be reaching out to both of you. And with Rajaji, I think what we need is a experts panel here to help us formulate our strategy and next steps, Gaurji. So we'll get in touch with these gentlemen, wonderful people. I mean, I've known Dastidarji for a very long time.
We'll be in touch with every one of you.
I'm glad
sure.
Dr.
And we'll have more events like this. Yeah, it's very enlightening. Yes, thank you.
Right. Okay. With that, thank you. Sunilji, are you there? Maybe you can also chime in with your military. Sunilji is there?
Yeah, Sunilji, unmute yourself, Sunilji. Sunilji, we can't hear you. You're muted.
Yeah, I am Sunil Agarwal. Sunil Agarwal. I have served in military, and I have lived in Plano, and I am associated with Hindustan Republican Association, and I really enjoyed today's talk, and so many learned people here, and we hope to have such meetings quite often. Thank you very much.
Yeah, with that, I'll just chime in the value proposition that people with military background bring into this effort. So, there is this image of this Indian caricature. I mean, even if you look at, sorry, I'm digressing here, but if you look at some of these comedy shows, they will caricature the Indian as the IT guy who is out there to fix computers. Okay, that is very demeaning. Okay, so we hope through these efforts, we not only we revive our martial traditions here in the US, I'm talking about in the US, and also send more and more Indians into Hindustanis into military services as well as police services, and the communities that do not or who give up their martial traditions are doomed for, and they actually are eliminated in a genocide. That always happens if you look at history. So with the engagement of people with military background, we hope to inject the programs that will enable, empower, educate, and let our kids. I mean, there are enough doctors and lawyers and IT people all over.
Yes.
Let's have some military people go join the U.S. Army, even the local police services, and take pride in our martial traditions. And with the with the Sunilji's help, and there are other many people from the Indian Army background who are here,
Yes.
whom we are trying to engage, will help us in that process. Okay.
Sure.
With that, thank you everybody. Thank you. Special gratitude
you.
to Rajaji
Thank you.
for taking the time off and this Sunday to sharing this great knowledge with us, and we'll continue our engagement. Thanks everybody. Namaskar.
Thank you.
Thank you. Namaskar.
Namaskar.